Hey guys, what is up? Unrested back with a bit of a late video. I have been working in the background quietly trying to get Osiroshi ready for a post-summer release. Hence, I am getting later and later with these videos. I will catch up though, I promise to all you and including my members as well. But with that said, let's get into today's topic, a bit of a controversial one. Why Ubisoft, the software company, is racist against Japanese. And this is coming from Japanese people who I interviewed. If you don't know about the whole story behind this, Ubisoft is coming out with a game that is another in the series called Assassin's Creed, which usually goes from country to country and covers things that are these stories of assassins in different country. They've done everything from Viking versions of this to Saudi Arabian to French and pirate versions of this and stuff like this. So they were bringing a new one to the region of Japan, and they've decided to call it historical fiction, which the Japanese are not too happy about. And this is coming firsthand from Japanese people who I interviewed who are big into gaming, big into the Ubisoft series, and really pissed off at how their country is being represented in a very sort of racist, non-committal, sort of shoved off the shelf sort of way that Ubisoft is handling this. If you don't know, there of course is a lineage of shinobi, which is ninja, but really shinobi is the correct word, and samurai in Japan. I'm sure anybody who's even drank the smallest bit of information from Japan knows these things. And they want to be represented in these Assassin's Creed games because, of course, this is about assassins. And who better to wield weapons than the samurai or shinobi from Japan's history? Now, what they've done is instead of going with a very, very famous samurai such as Oda Nobunaga, they've decided to go with Yasuke, who wasn't actually a samurai at all. Yasuke is a black man who was first actually dealing with a ton of struggles because he was kidnapped by European slave traders. So he does have a harsh and brutal story of survival and is a man who went through quite a bit and struggled a lot through life. He eventually was sold off in Japan after he was kidnapped by European slave traders, where he was bought by a shinobi shogunate known as Oda Nobunaga, who is by far the most famous samurai in all of Japan. Nobunaga was known for actually treating him really quite well, but there was some of sort of these, for the time, you got to remember this is Edo era when people never left Japan. There was some sort of almost comedic stories. I don't know what you would call these stories. The most famous story is that when he first came into Nobunaga's palace, he was given like a really high level job and everything, but he was asked first to prove that his skin was not dyed or that it wasn't painted because Nobunaga had never seen a black person before ever in his life. And again, you got to realize this isn't racism back then. This is a guy who's never seen anybody who wasn't Japanese before. Like even white people were like a shock to Nobunaga. He actually made the guy take a bath. He made Yasuke take a bath. And by the way, Yasuke's first name was not Yasuke. He took on a Japanese name when he came to Japan because that was pretty much tradition in Japan that you took on a Japanese name if you integrated into Japanese society. Even today, still to this day, if I were to get Japanese citizenship, I would have to change my name to a Japanese name. I would also have to pick out kanji for my name. So this is something that has existed for a very long time. It's just part of becoming naturalized in Japan. So Yasuke comes in there. Nobunaga is just like floored by this guy. He cannot believe that this is somebody from a totally different country where they don't even have the same skin color as him. Same with the white slave traders who came there too. He couldn't believe that these guys were actually white. But for Yasuke, he made him like take a bath and like all this other stuff. Like he had him scrub himself and everything to prove he really wasn't like painted or dyed black because he literally could not believe that. That's like the most famous story from Nobunaga. Now, if you know anything about Japanese history, there was a massive war during Edo era, and shogunate fought shogunate. Samurais fought samurais for different areas of Japan. Oda was by far the most famous of these because he led so many battles where he was like ultra victorious. He won damn near everything he fought until the very, very end, where he was finally conquered, and he committed to self-unlife, as you do as a samurai. When you are defeated, usually you commit seppuku, which means you stab yourself in the stomach while someone brings down a katana on your neck to also decapitate you at the same time, so there isn't like long overdue suffering and torment during your death. This is what Nobunaga and his group of samurai did after they were defeated. And it was not recorded that Yasuke was part of this. He was actually part of the staff that was allowed to flee the castle, or really the jo, that they were part of at the time, as was usually allowed. They were not slaughtered and killed outright, although sometimes this did happen, because when a samurai would take up arms against another nation, everybody within his village or that was connected to his farming land and everything like that picked up a weapon and would also fight. And this is something even Yasuke did. He did pick up a weapon and help fight. He was not a samurai, though. And this is the big problem, because he is shown as the number one samurai in this fake historical video game about Japan. And it's kind of like, imagine if there was a historical video game about France where Napoleon was kind of cast aside for an Asian person who happened to be in France during the time of the Napoleon Wars. And he was made the main star. Probably French people would be kind of pissed off. They'd be like, well, why wouldn't you talk about the main guy who's part of our country and represents, a big historical part of our country? Not saying Napoleon was a great guy. Also, Oda Nobunaga was not an awesome guy either. He did some pretty cruel stuff too. But Japan would like to see if their country is represented in a semi-historical video game that they actually use, imagine this, Japanese people to be represented. And for the most part, Japanese are very calm, very pacifist, very laid back about anything representing Japan. Even in World War II games by Call of Duty and stuff like that, I've talked to Japanese people and they're like, yeah, I don't care if like Japanese people are killed in that game, because they really were killed in the war of, it's not offensive to me to see us both dying in battle. And they're also of the mindset that if something is completely fantasy, as in like Final Fantasy-esque or labeled as complete fantasy, they don't care about who is represented whatsoever. For example, Afro Samurai is a completely fantasy-based story about a black samurai. They love that series too. In fact, most of them said, we really, really love seeing LGBTQ plus and multiracial things represented in fantasy stories about Japan. But what they do have a problem with this is that Ubisoft is saying this is a historical part of Japan. So kind of almost like telling Japan, no, this is your history. You don't know it well enough. And actually, if you go to Wikipedia, the English Wikipedia, someone has changed it to say Yasuke was a samurai during that time after this whole controversy started. And if you look at the sources on that, it says currently being discussed. So it's not even sourced by anything. If you go to the Japanese version, meaning you switch everything to Japan and go and read the Japanese version of Wikipedia, he is not listed as a samurai, because there is nothing in Japanese history that ever had Yasuke listed as a samurai. And that's where they're really pissed off. Another small part of it too is also the shinobi is a girl, which, not to be sexist or anything, but for the most part, all warriors in Japan during that time were men. I know some people be really pissed off about that, but think about even Call of Duty, where they had World War II and they tried to add a bunch of women and people with like purple hair and also people with like prosthetics into World War II themes, and nobody bought the game because there just wasn't stuff like that. You couldn't have like piercings or dyed hair or prosthetics, and there weren't like women actually fighting combat parts aside from like nurse and, some auxiliary jobs and stuff like that throughout World War II. So people are just kind of like, this is so historically inaccurate. Why would you call this World War II? Now, again, if they called this Call of Duty Fantasy Wars, I don't think anybody would care that you could add all these different prosthetics and purple hair and eye patches and cool sunglasses and stuff like that, because it's just fantasy based. And Japan is saying the same thing about this. Please don't call it a historical story about our country and then change our country's history. What I've talked to about, this is from my friend Takehiro and my other friend who just goes by the name Yaya. He said, what isn't right is they're making a joke of our history and even a joke of the struggle of Yasuke himself, who he struggled with the fact that he was kidnapped and put into slavery. Why don't you tell his story from that perspective? A lot of my friends are saying, instead of trying to make up a fake story about him being a samurai. Also, the fact that there's a historical record of all the samurai on Oda Nobunaga's staff that committed suicide after losing the war, and Yasuke's name's not on there, it's really dishonorable to say that he was part of that group when those guys pretty much killed themselves for this whole united battle against other shogunate. It's like really disrespectful to them to be like, oh yeah, and there was this other guy you guys just didn't know about, he wasn't recorded. If this was done by like a famous general, or this was even done about other parts of the world, which Ubisoft has done in the past, for example, the Vikings, they had an Assassin's Creed about that group. Well, there were actually black Vikings called the Blue Men, but you noticed they didn't represent any of them during the making of that game. So why suddenly now, when they're making the Japanese game, they want to add a black guy as a samurai as the main character? So this is a lot of stuff that they're bringing up. They're really pissed off about. If you read some of the comments, they went through and they went to the actual Ubisoft trailer for this, and they translated some of the comments for me because some of them were talking about things I didn't even completely understand, using a lot of slang and stuff like that, or just kanji I didn't know yet. One of the most mentioned things to me was, it said, why must they play rap music and kill Japanese people to rap music? Why must I be killed by a black samurai who didn't exist in my game about my country? So pretty much what they're saying is like, they're playing rap music with a black guy in there, which is already kind of racist for Ubisoft to do. Like, what, black people can only be represented by rap music? You couldn't play actually like traditional Japanese music? Because this is being done during Edo era. There wasn't rap music during Edo era. If they show a black guy, they have to play rap music. And also, why do they have Japanese people dying to this black guy while they play rap music over their deaths? Like, look at a game like Ghost of Tsushima. If you look at that, they play the traditional Shimasen music. They're very honorable with how they represent the Mongol warriors and how they represent the samurai warriors during that time. This was also another foreign company that made the game that wasn't actually Japanese people. And the people who actually live in Tsushima to this day are so honored by that game. They think it was so traditional and historically accurate that they actually gave an award to that company. So that's how Japan wants to be represented. They want to be represented by the people who were actually in these wars and fighting as samurai when their history is brought up in video games. They don't care about having video games made about them. That's not the issue. It's changing their historical past and adding things to it that didn't exist and then trying to tell the world this did exist. There's even small things in there like there is sakura blossom, cherry blossom in every single scene, in every single season within the trailer to that game. And this is also like a really disrespectful thing to do because pretty much cherry blossoms only come around between February. February, March is usually the blooming season for this. And it is a representation of no matter how much hard stuff you've gone through for the year, that always the cherry blossom will be born anew and take all that pain away and show you that fresh new life is birthed each spring. It's like a sign of hope of prospering even after things like the Fukushima disaster. Like Sakura blossoms were super important as a symbol after that, people could go on and keep living and things were still going to continue. Life was going to be born anew. And this has always been the representation of the Sakura blossom for that spring season, because, spring season everywhere is new life, new birth, blooming buds, procreation of life and everything like that. This is a super historical, symbolic, traditional plant that they just decided to put it in every single scene, every single season, not give any kind of meaning or anything behind it. When this is like, to give you an idea, it's in their national anthem. If you read the Japanese national anthem, the tree is talked about in there. It's so important to them. And Ubisoft just totally ignored this. Yet they still say that their game is historically accurate, but they can't even get something as simple as seasons in Japan correct, or one of the most important plants to the entire country correct. So the worst part about it, and this is kind of how I'm going to end this video, is the statement made by Ubisoft is they wanted to make a samurai that could best represent a player in Japan. And it's like, don't you understand? There weren't any foreigners. There weren't any gaijin. There weren't any foreign people in Japan at the time as a samurai during the War of Nobunaga. So why would you need to make that? They didn't need to do it for Ghost of Tsushima. You played a man who was a samurai during that war, and you were able to see the whole war and history of Japan through his eyes as a player, and people still understood it fine. You can be historically accurate and still give people a vision of what it would be like to be a samurai during that time. You don't need to lie about the history and struggle of a black man who was kidnapped and had to fight through slavery to survive. And you don't need to also disregard actual samurai who existed during that time by creating a fake one that doesn't historically represent Japan whatsoever. And this is where there's already been actually a petition signed by over 50,000 Japanese asking Ubisoft to please not publish this game. I can already tell you this game's not going to be sold in Japan. And it's just kind of ultra racist for them to pretty much yell at Japan for being racist against black people because they don't want a black samurai in their game. And that's not the issue at all. Again, there's literally black samurai manga in Japan, like Afro Samurai. There's literally stories about all different types of races being samurai, but those are all considered fantasy stories and not meant to represent Japan. And people know this, they read it, get into the character, enjoy it as a fantasy. All right, Samurai Champloo too. That's obviously a completely fake thing. Blue-eyed samurai, obviously a completely fake thing. Okay, there wasn't any such thing as a girl with blue eyes who was a samurai. And these are all labeled as fantasy stories. They're fine with that. They love these stories. These are like really honored, well-loved stories that are considered fantasy stories about Japan. And if that's what Ubisoft wanted to call this, it would be fine. It's the fact that they're labeling it as historical is where Japanese people are getting really pissed off. Imagine if someone rewrote your country's history about your most famous warriors. Like, imagine Red Dead Redemption with Asian cowboys. You'd be like, what is going on here? Maybe there was an Asian cowboy during the time of Red Dead Redemption. There was Chinese people working on railroads during that time. So maybe somewhere in America there was. But if the main character of Red Dead Redemption was an Asian cowboy, Americans would be pissed. They'd be like, what are you talking about? What is this? This doesn't make any sense. And that's exactly how Japanese people are feeling right now. Again, this is just the actual answers to a lot of the questions I had for my Japanese friends who are big gamers. They're big into this series. They're big into Ubisoft games. Personally, I'm not a massive Ubisoft game fan to begin with. I feel like every single game they come out with is just like a map full of orange dots where you just run from one orange dot to the other trying to do nonstop fetch quests or kill quests. I'm more of an Elden Ring fan, obviously, myself, but my other friends were big fans of this series, and they've pretty much decided to end their complete relationship with the company. And most of Japan is not a big fan of Ubisoft at all anymore. And it's because this game is considered really racist here in Japan. What do you guys think, though? Do you feel like this is a racist take on Japanese? Is it disrespectful to the history of their samurai? Is it disrespectful to the history of Japan in general for Ubisoft to call this a quote-unquote historical story or even historical fiction story? What exactly is historical fiction if not fantasy? Why not just call it a fantasy story? Anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Like I said, one of the big things I am working on right now is that fresh new take on Osoroshi Saturday, which it'll probably just be called Osoroshi. It's not going to be only a Saturday thing. I'm probably going to put them out maybe 1 or 2 times a month, but I am collecting a lot of footage right now. The footage you're actually seeing in this video is of Nara. I was just there. Checking out the area where there's more city rather than the deer running around. I've done enough videos on the deer running around Nara. This is just kind of a more city area of Nara. Let me know what you guys think about that. Other than that, I'd just like to say, those of you who are members, I appreciate a bunch. If you yourself want to become a member, it's $1.90 a month, and it gets you 4 extra videos every single month. And I would like to give a shout out to all those people. There's a few new ones too, so we want to give them a shout out too, such as Max Wren, Oz Dev, Corin Copetto, John Manbob, Alejandro Cisneros, Blap 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 Blap, Humble Monk, Andre Sanchez, Raymond Beckman, Jay, Aaron Spooner, SSG Sax Gamer, Eviscerations, Nazel, Ryan, Kaiser Grendel, Bridget Walton, Jones G, Andy, Carolyn Markey, Mitchell, Impressive Tony, Matt Lee, Silver Stitch 28, Jose Casillas, Murphy, Draz Creates, Light Lolouch, Smile Kita 13, Worm Self, Chrissy Meow, Sriracha, Frorasu, No Dub Only Raw, Citrus, Steve Ring, Fat Jaskins, Sprinkly Donut, Yodaru, Ricardo Contreras, Anna Loki, Slayer Duck, Blind Man Travels, Jonas Slocum, Ice Cold, Reinhard or Die Trying, Trek Nick, and I Am Sandpaper. If you want your name listed at the end of this video, it's $1.90 a month to join, and you get 4 extra videos. Guys, your members video is coming out tomorrow. It should be a pretty good one to give you a little bit of a glance into some of the stories that are coming up for Osoroshi Saturday. So if you're interested in hearing about some of those scary stories and want to get a sneak peek at one of them, join now, and you will. Until next time, I've been Unrested, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.